Hello, everyone! I'm Wolfclaw, and may I introduce you to the new and improved ReZero podcast, where we cover all things ReZero, and it's going to be very fun. I will introduce my wonderful co-host that will be joining me on this amazing journey. Hello, Gold. Introduce yourself, my friend.
Hello, my name is Gold, and I'm somebody who's worked with Wolf and worked with the community for a very long time now, approaching 3 or 4 years. And I'm really excited to do this as well, talk about the series and everything going on with it, inside of it, outside of it. You know how it is.
Awesome! Oh, hell yeah. And introducing my second wonderful co-host, Connor.
Hello, I'm Connor. You might know me online as Palazard. I am a part of Studio Reverie, working as their primary translator, another voice actor within the group. I've also been involved in the ReZero community for about 3 or 4 years or so, and I'm thrilled to be a part of this and excited to talk about all things ReZero with you fine gentlemen.
It is going to be an auspicious day, indeed. Talking
Oh,
ReZero.
auspicious. You don't hear that in this day and
I'm
age.
using my big boy words today. I got to seem very professional and cool. So today, this is our introductory pilot episode for the ReZero podcast. Now, for anyone who's new and doesn't know, I used to co-host this podcast back in the day with my good friend C Tactics before the major Katakawa strikes against ReZero content creators. So that content is unfortunately no longer available to watch. But he has given me his blessing to continue the podcast on in a new and I would say, cool new way. So the goal for today's episode, which I wanted to introduce us with, was that we would talk about our experience with ReZero as a whole, stuff we love not as much, and also talk about when we first discovered ReZero, how we discovered it, in what medium we discovered it, and just talk in general about the series that we love very dearly.
Yeah, and for me, it's not terribly exciting, but I think we should go for the you first, the person asking the questions. Sorry for flipping it back on you so quickly, but I think
like
people are interested in that too. So yeah.
Awesome. Okay. So I guess it would be about 4 years ago. Yeah, 4 years ago. So about 4 years ago, I was hanging out with my friends on a this is very cringe. A PlayStation party. We were hanging out, talking games and stuff. It was a fantastic evening, I will say.
Wait, not even an Xbox party?
No. This was okay. I'm gonna be honest with you. I'm more of an Xbox man myself, but I got the PlayStation to hang out with my friends. I know.
I mean, PlayStation did have better games, but don't tell me that 8 years ago, whenever I bought it.
I would have to disagree respectfully, but
all right, we're not going to get into that this podcast.
That is too much of a side tangent. This is the ReZero podcast. So my friends were talking to me, and they randomly brought up the fact that they just were like, yo, anime's fucking awesome. My two friends, who I never really heard talk much about anime at all, as someone that had never watched anime ever, and they were randomly they were getting really into it, talking about all their favorite shows, and I was just like, you know what, gents, I'm glad you enjoy this, but I don't think this is the medium for me. I've never tried it, but it doesn't seem to interest me too much. And then my friends were like, "Oh, is that so? No, I think it'd be right up your alley, mate." So they recommended me this show, which to this day I have a lot of nostalgia for. But if I'm being honest, the quality is a bit middling, and that is Overlord. I don't know if you gentlemen have ever heard of Overlord before.
Yeah, I've heard of it a few times.
It's one of the sideshows in the Isekai Quartet.
Yeah.
Oh right, there's that skeleton guy.
Yeah. So that show is a wild ride of a story, I will say. I never experienced an isekai story ever until that point. And Overlord's a really interesting play on isekai, where the main character is kind of like a villainous anti-hero figure, almost, in the story. So it's kind of like flipped from what you'd normally see in an isekai. But as my first isekai, I was like, yo, this is cool. I'm following the bad guy. I like this. So,
yeah, it probably feels really awesome for your first isekai.
Yeah, it was a really interesting experience. And I watched the first episode, literally, I think it was that night after they told me about it. It was, yeah. And I got really into it. And I was like, holy shit, I love fantasy. This is my shit, bro. This is awesome. The soundtrack is popping off. The voice acting for Overlord's dub, can I just say, it's fucking phenomenal. It really got me invested. And the opening song for the first season of that show, oh, Nelly, what a fucking banger. So there I was, binging the entire Overlord series in one night, first season, mind you. And I was like, yo, now this is my shit. I got really into it. So the next day, I'm in a PlayStation party again, and we're talking about it. And my friends are like, yo, you really like this? Well, they listed off a load of other shows for me to watch. So fast forward about a month, I'd watched a couple other anime up to that point, and I was getting really into it. I was really enjoying it. And this other show that my friend recommended to me popped up when I was browsing the 7 Seas, as you do. And it was called ReZero, Starting Life in Another World. I made the mistake of, instead of just hopping blind into it, I read the summary. And the summary of the first season is very weird, I will say. It doesn't really encapsulate the story too well. But I was like, whoa, this is kind of cool. This is some time loop stuff. I love time loops. I love time stuff and stories. This is going to be awesome. So I just jumped straight into it. I wholeheartedly fell in love with ReZero when I watched it. So at the time when I was watching it, I was only watching anime dubbed. And the first part of the dub for season 1 had been released, but not the second part. So I binged through the first 12 episodes of the dub, and I fucking loved it. I loved it so much. I was obsessed. I think it just hit all the notes of a story that I'd always wanted, but never fully got, and I got it. And it was awesome. And it came at the perfect time. It was really interesting having Subaru as a protagonist at that point in my life, because it helped me in terms of my self-improvement. But I was like, oh, I've run out of ReZero content. So I decided to jump straight into the light novels. I jumped fully into them. I think there was 8 released by Yen Press in English at that point. So I binged through all of them. And I loved it even more.
You were a book reader.
Oh, yeah. So I'm more of a reader at heart myself. If I can read something instead of watching it, I will, most of the time.
He says, having ignored the subtitled version of shows for the primary part of his anime introduction.
I did. Specifically, I did that because my friends told me I should start in dubbed. So I listened to them. Fast forward to today, I now watch every single show in sub because I like to read. I got fully invested in those novels, man. They were so good. I don't know what it is about Teppei's writing in particular, the author of ReZero, but even through translation, it feels very unique to me. I don't think I've read anything like his stuff before. So I was loving it. I was having a great time. I was at college, and instead of doing my homework, I would sit on the bench, wait for my next lesson, and read some ReZero. And that was my time. I eventually got caught up to the 8th volume of the light novel, which at the time was the latest in Yen Press's translation, because they translate those novels so fucking slowly and with such poor quality. Jesus Christ.
Let's not make enemies so quickly.
But, my opinion.
I mean, I can say from experience, it's not the easiest thing to translate.
Oh, no. And I wouldn't personally have a go at translators, in the work they do myself. I feel a lot with a lot of these companies, they very much have this. They're not companies are only interested in it for profit, right? They don't have feelings or emotions. So when they set hard deadlines for a lot of these translators, I feel it puts them in a bit of a rough spot in terms of what.
Yeah, that's totally fair.
But at this point, I was like, I want more ReZero. And I don't have the light novels, so what do I do next? And then I looked up on Reddit, and there was this amazing little guide that told me, oh yeah, we've got the web novel of Arc 4 translated here. If you want to get past a certain point of the light novels, you just need to watch the last 2 episodes of the anime in sub, and you can jump straight into this web novel from the Arc 3 interludes into Arc 4. I was like, oh, awesome. Why not? I'll do it. So I watched the last 2 episodes and subbed. it was very different from the experience of reading the novels of Arc 3 up until that point. It kind of felt like jumping into something new almost. It was a really interesting experience, honestly. But I finished up the last 2 episodes of the anime, and then I read Arc 4. And I read all of Arc 4 in like 4 days at the time. Yes. And then I started reading Arc 5 as it was getting translated. Because at that point it wasn't fully translated. There were lots of gaps in between the chapters. So
Now, for our listeners at home, what is Arc 4 in relation to the anime?
So Arc 4 would be Season 2 for the ReZero anime. Which was condensed a lot from the web novel to the light novel. So the content you see in Season 2 of the anime is very, very different in a lot of ways to the original content of the web novel. So it's a very different experience, but just as awesome. And Arc 5 of the web novel would relate to Season 3 content, which will be coming out hopefully soon. But yeah, and that was my sort of journey with ReZero. I became obsessed very quickly, and it was my life for like 3 years. I joined the ReZero podcast, of which this is the spiritual successor of. I made many friends in the community. I then started the mother channel of this podcast, which is also the channel that does the Arc 5 readings, Studio Reverie, of which I'm now the boss.
And the history of that is a thing of itself, but
another thing entirely, which we will, I'm sure, discuss at some point.
Yeah, maybe in one of our more darker days we might go into it.
we might talk about the dark times.
But needless to say that things are, pretty decent right now for all of us, really. But divorced from ReZero as sometimes our life is, we've been doing this for quite a while at this point.
Yeah, it's been a long time, which is rather interesting, I'd say, as well, because Connor, you've joined the project rather recently, eh? So it's probably a almost entirely different experience for you.
Relatively recently, not rather recently. It has been over a year now since I was brought on.
Oh my god, really?
Yes.
How time flies. Wow. Oh my god.
Yeah, you'd be surprised.
Yeah, it has been a year.
Like learning that 2021 was when Season 2 came out.
Yes. Which we talked about just before we started this podcast. That was a whole new, making me feel like an old man moment, I will say. So yeah, that was kind of my introduction to ReZero. Would any of you gentlemen like to share how you got introduced to ReZero and like when you did and how it kind of impacted you?
Yeah, I mean, I can.
Hey, go ahead.
Okay, cool. Where do I even start? Okay, so first I'll say that it was actually maybe my second or third anime at the time. The other two, less important. But basically, I was the type of person to be like, what's the best anime right now, right? I typed that into Google or wherever, and I got a response. People were talking a lot about ReZero at the time, because I'm pretty sure when I looked that up, it was, one, still airing, and two, it was at a point in time in which Reddit, by the way, the ReZero's Reddit has been around for like 8 years, but the Reddit for r/anime, which, don't even look there. That's my personal recommendation to all of you. But don't look there. But when I did look there, it was getting so much awards. It was getting 10,000 upvotes per episode. It was going haywire. Everybody was talking about it. Everybody was making YouTube videos about it. It was the only thing pretty much the entire anime community could think about when it was airing. At the same time, yeah, this was pretty much like the big resurgence of anime around these few years, 2016, I would say. Is that when Attack on Titan first aired? Is that same year? I don't know.
It would have first aired 2014.
2014. Yeah, so this was like the second wave of like the new generation of anime, and ReZero was at the top of the conversation list. Oh, I think Mob Psycho was going on at the same time. That's another thing. Yeah, so it was One Punch Man, right? One Punch Man and Mob Psycho, I think. So yeah, like there was big anime coming out at the same time. And people talk about ReZero, so I started watching it, and I know that I started watching it during the Whale arc. because I check the first the episode that's latest released, and I clicked on that episode, and there's a flying whale and stuff like that, and I was like, what's going on? So I was like, I guess I'll watch it anyway. And yeah, it was really good. I got really into it really quickly. Um, I really liked, I mean, everything about it. Pretty much, the voice acting was really emotional. It was kind of dark. It was kind of gritty, and of course, the soundtrack was gorgeous. So yeah, that all made me pine for the next episode. And you'd go and look at people crying over Rem, doing reaction videos of the Rem scene where she talks to Subaru and stuff like that. So I would continue to chain. Did anybody else do this? Did anybody else watch people like react to ReZero when it was coming out?
Yes, I'll get to that during my introduction.
Yeah. But pretty much it was free rewatches of the show. So when I say that I've probably rewatched the show, I don't know, like somewhere between 20 to 30 times, it's probably because of the fact that I've seen other people watch the episodes.
Yeah, in fairness, I can admit to the same thing. I am obsessed whenever I see a new channel react to ReZero. I'll always give it a check out, see what they think.
It's an excuse for rewatching
it's an excuse
it.
for me to rewatch, yeah.
Yeah. And, being able to see other people enjoy it as well was like huge at the time because, of course, it was such a huge cultural thing. But like, it's not something that you can easily talk to people about, especially at say I was 14 at the time. It was 2016, and like you'd still get called a huge dweeb if you liked it. Like even liking Sword Art Online, like or Attack on Titan, would be like, okay, well, you're kind of painting a target on your back for being like a really big nerd,
Yeah.
So
Man, the difference between high school in 2014 and college in 2014 is specifically for those two shows must have been drastic because everybody was talking about them at that time when I was about 18 or 19.
yeah,
Like,
no, I mean,
it had broke the anime culture at that point.
it's super easy. I mean, especially nowadays, I feel like it's easier to like anime in general, obviously. But like back in the day, if you're older and you like anime, right? Like say you're like 18 or even later in high school, it's easy. But when you're like a freshman in high school or like second year in middle school, it's like it's still pretty rough to like talk about it. People will kind of poke fun at it. They're kind of in that interstices space where you're like, oh, I'm adult and I can't like dumb things like cartoons, right? It's still like
in
you still
that
have that kind of
stage,
pride.
Yeah, I because I got into anime when I was around 17 during my UK college stuff. I had the rather fortunate experience of not having to have that happen to me. But I know for a lot of people that got into anime younger, it was pretty rough in terms of the social outcast kind of stuff.
Yeah, so I usually kept that really to myself. So the only places where I did see people talk about it is online and in reactions. And I would actually kind of not be super into the community of it for a very long time. I would say that like I watched it, I was really into it for a bit, and then more anime came out, more anime came out, more anime came out, and I kind of just kept on rolling down the hill. But the thing that always kept me back was I would think about or even just listen to one of the openings, one or Mythanoid song, and I'd be like, man, I need to go back and watch some more ReZero, right? And then, for example, like think I kind of took the plunge afterwards, like a year after the anime ended, and started reading Arc 4. I remember I kind of binged all of Arc 4 in like a few days, really. Like I was like 12 hours a day reading it for a while. And until the end, pretty much it hooked me pretty immediately. There was like a really good document that was just like, yep, here's 500 pages, go nuts, and I just scroll, and eventually I reached the end. But yeah, and then I went to Arc 5, and just like you said, Wolf, yeah, the Arc 5 wasn't done translated yet. There was like one person, but they were on vacation or they were kind of done with it. They were like doing it on and off for a while, but then they think they were called Translation Chicken. Do you remember that?
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
that's them.
yes, I do.
Yes. And they were kind of on and off with doing the translations for Arc 5 until somebody else finally picked it up and finished it, I think, right? Is that how it worked?
Yes.
Or did
Someone
they finish
filled in
it?
the gaps, and then I think someone else like went back through a lot of it and
Yeah.
adjusted it.
I think, yeah, you're right, Connor. That was what happened.
It might have been Heretic, but I'm not positive.
I'm not
Yeah.
too positive on who did it, actually.
But what made me finish Arc 5 was probably Season 2, I think. When Season 2 when it was coming out, like I was like, oh, I have to finish Arc 5 before Season 2 because I already know so much about Arc 5. I might as well just finish it, right? And I did that. See, I'm not like a huge ReZero nerd. So like for me, I wasn't like in the community, like scrounging for the scraps of like, oh, I can't wait for Season 2 to come out. That was all by myself. I was kind of keeping that all contained all by myself up until the point in which I pretty much decided to be like, I started watching people react to Arc 5 ostensibly, right? In the web novel. And I pretty much was like, man, these guys are goofing off. They're like having to read it all, but they're kind of like bored about it. So I'm going to jump in and I'm going to be like, hey, I'll help read it. And they're like, yeah, sure. You can come in, I guess. I don't know why they said so that I could, but I could. And I went in and I read it, and then everything transformed. And that's the history of everything we're doing now, but we're not getting to that history. But needless to say, that got me really back into ReZero hardcore for a long while. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I can't really think of anything else.
Thank you so much, Gold. God, I do love hearing other people's stories of how like people got into ReZero. It's really cool, like because you watched the anime, like the first season as it aired in 2016, and that's like very different from my experience. So it's really interesting hearing you talk about the culture of how excited people were at the time for it.
Yeah, people were super excited about it.
So because I never got to experience that, I only got that experience with season 2.
I remember people memeing the hell out of Juice all the time.
Yeah, I bet that was a huge sensation at the time, eh?
Yeah, people, the thing where he's hunched up in a ball.
Yes, yes.
The unseen hand. Yeah, that was a huge meme. People kept on editing him into things.
I bet there were so many GIFs.
Yeah, 100%.
So I guess we'll move on to you now, Connor. What was your experience with ReZero, how you first got into it, and what you felt about it?
So I'm the late entry, not only to our channel, but also to this show in general. I've actually been in the anime scene and enjoying it and been a fan of it since I was about 11 or 12, which would have been 20, I don't even know, 2007, I think, 2009.
Oh, wow.
Around that era. So I've been watching shows like this for a while. And for whatever reason, ReZero Season 1 just completely slipped my radar. I was in the midst of college for us, university for you, and it just completely skipped my notice. I didn't see anything about it. I wasn't like in the scene online. I'm still not super in social media in general, so I miss a lot of that community stuff more often than not. But then during the pandemic, around like the peak of season 2, a reaction channel that also does like long form discussions afterwards that I was watching just happened to have that show voted in on one of their polls. And I checked out their video for the first couple episodes, thought that the time loop was a super interesting concept, and found that the entire season 1 director's cut in dub was available on HBO. It may have been Now, I think HBO Now at that time.
Oh, it was available on HBO.
Yeah, only the director's cut and only in dub, no season 2, which had already had several episodes out. But I checked that out, enjoyed it, a decent amount. It was kind of like a passive show. Subaru's cringe in the beginning of the story was beginning to bother me a decent amount, and I was getting ready to drop it when I finally got to episode 15 or 7 in the director's cut. And that drew my attention, and I had to just put down what I was doing. I binged the rest of the season, fell like really, really hardcore into the emotional aspects, and I actually went back and restarted the season, now knowing Subaru's whole thing, and it hit me a lot more different than it had prior.
Yeah, it like completely clicked.
Switched to sub for season 2 to catch up bought a Crunchyroll subscription for the first time to do it too. And just went through the rest of that. Binged up every episode that was available. Finally caught up when it was, I think this would have been episode 16 of season 2, I think. It's like right in the peak of where everything is happening, like in the middle of the climax. Finished that off when it finally was done, and then found the web novel. I think I read all of the Arc 5 web novel in 4 days.
Oh my god, good on you.
Stumbled on your channel like the day after that, when I think you guys were on your second stream for the first live readings of this.
God, that is good.
And then I just kept reading until I reached the point where Arc 6 was finished. There was only one chapter into Arc 7, and there was nothing else available in English. So that's actually the point where I decided, I'm just going to teach myself Japanese. It'll be faster than the light novels getting released in English.
It will
which has been proven true.
Yes, your thesis was proved true.
Just kept up with it. I've gone back to the show with other channels and just with a couple of my friends, watching it with them and deep diving into the episodes as I went. 2 or 3 times now, honestly, for that. Until you guys finally threw up your casting call for Julius and I joined the channel.
Right. Yeah, that's 100% right.
That
Man, yeah. I mean, we all have kind of different but similar entry points in it, in the sense that we all kind of not really motivated by anybody else to really, really love it, but we're just sort of deeply connected to it individually.
But I think in a way that speaks to how gripping the show was for us, in the sense that it wasn't even like a community push to really watch it and be involved with it. It genuinely was like an individual experience that was interesting for us. And it's really interesting hearing your guys' experience with the show and the novel, and how you kind of fell into it. But I think we all have that similar line of this just makes me think really deeply. It makes me want to analyze, right? And I think that's something with ReZero that I've never truly had the same level of wanting to deep dive into literally every detail of this story and analyze everything. I think especially for you, Connor, when you were talking about how the first season kind of clicked into pace when you with the 15th episode, and then obviously when you got to the 18th episode and kind of understanding Subaru a bit more, and then going back
really
and
it was really episode 18 that I realized how much I wasn't really paying attention to it.
Yeah.
And that was probably because I was seeing too much of myself in Subaru and didn't want to look at it.
Yes, and this is I think which is a very unique phenomenon with ReZero, because I had the exact same experience that you did with that, where I never really got annoyed at Subaru's behavior. I think especially because I was reading the light novels. At the point where I got to that part of Subaru's behavior, it was more understandable for me, because they kind of play it up a bit more in the anime. I don't know if anyone else agrees with that, but in my opinion, it's a bit more pronounced.
Actually, I disagree pretty heavily on that personally. Really? I think it's much worse in the books, and especially in the web novel.
I've not read the web novel.
Well, to me, I mean, but which one's worse doesn't really matter. I think the voice acting kind of immediately endears you to the sentiment. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it kind of
gives a person to point at.
It makes it even more human of a moment, I guess, in the worst way possible.
Yeah. I mean, when was the moment that you kind of got it,
I think when it truly hit for me was actually episode 15. 18 was this really big revelation for me, at least at that point in the light novel, in terms of comparison of where the story was at. When I was reading around the events of episode 15 in the novel, I kind of had this inkling that there was a bit more to Subaru's character, because I'd been thinking that previously. But I kind of felt this there's something a lot more going on here, which I wasn't completely paying attention to. So then when the events of episode 18 hit around in the novels, and I read through that scene, I remember this actually vividly, because I was at my college bench reading, and I had a bit of an existential moment of, Jesus fucking Christ, Subaru is me in so many uncomfortable ways. this man is like me. Well, this kid is like me. I was around the same age at the time as well, only about 2 years older. So it hit extra for me that, oh my god, this is all my flaws kind of being laid out on a plate for me. And I never truly have had such a moment of like self-introspection. And I don't think a story has ever done that for me before, in the sense of really make me think about my life and like myself as a person and change me for the better. Like actually motivate me to do things that I never would have done before. Like, for instance, this ReZero podcast, like, as I said before, the one I was previously a co-host on, I still to this day have really bad social anxiety, and I was very, very scared of introducing myself to the previous hosts of the old podcast, to the point where I almost didn't offer to be his co-host, which, if that had not happened, I would not even be here today on Reverie. Like, that was a direct chain of events that led me straight to here. ReZero really changed my life in a positive way. It allowed me to think in a more like healthy mindset and genuinely work on my flaws as a person. And I've never had a story do that for me before. So it's really special.
Yeah, that's ReZero is one of 3 pieces of media that's ever done that for me as well. Though I prefer to say that it got me to make the changes rather than changing me specifically.
Yeah,
like it's a wake up call. It's not a lesson per se.
Yeah, it's less of like a, oh, you're an idiot, you got this wrong. It's more of like, oh, gaining that self-awareness, right?
The only other ones that have really done that for me were Clannad After Story and the Lord of the Rings series, which are still both very high up on my most important pieces of media for myself personally. But like, obviously ReZero did inspire me to do a lot. I'm still learning Japanese because of the show.
Yeah.
Or technically because of the books, but irrelevant. It's an important story, I think. And I kind of got sucked into the trap that the author sets for a lot of the readers. Because as I mentioned before, I've already seen like plenty of anime before that. Like, I enjoyed Sword Art Online when it was coming out and grew to dislike it later. But I saw a lot of other kind of trash isekai and looked up some other trash ones on some less than allowed manga sites. So when I was going through it, Subaru just especially in the anime, he just comes off as the stereotypical isekai protagonist, even if he is getting his face eaten off or stabbed or brutally killed in 1,000 other ways.
Yeah,
every episode. He still acts the way that they act. Like, they even hit all the major tropes in the very first episode, to the point where he has a scene where he's walking hand in hand with Amelia and a little girl, pretending like they're a family.
Yeah.
Which they hit in every other show.
They even have that moment in the scene where he's directly almost fourth wall talking about it, right? And immediately shoots him down.
So I'm almost getting bored with it until he makes a fool of himself, and I think, oh, they're going to justify this and make him seem like he was in the right. He's going to have to like reset and do this a second time and prove everyone wrong. But then he just gets dumped and left behind, and I'm just kind of sitting there thinking, oh, this might take it differently. I'll keep it up. It gets to 15, everything goes crazy. Then it gets to 18, and I realize I was looking at it all wrong the whole time.
Yeah, I guess for you in particular, your experience with that is kind of different to me and Gold's, because it was one of our first anime, whereas to you were already at that point a veteran of the medium, right? So that like subversion experience you had was probably very unique for you.
Within this group, yes. I don't think that's unique to most people that come across this show.
Yeah. But when it's like I guess for when you experience it as one of your first anime, it's kind of like almost a different experience in a way to someone that's watched a lot of anime and then watches ReZero.
Yeah.
It probably also ruins the isekai genre for people.
Does.
When you see the subversion that just does everything better, it makes it harder to enjoy the junk food of anime is isekai.
I've genuinely, even as it being one of my first, I've just not been able to get into any of that power fantasy stuff, no matter how much I try. Because in general, I don't mind a decently well-written power fantasy story, but I don't know what it is about isekai in particular, because I'm always constantly comparing to ReZero when I watch or read something new. I'm like, wow, this really just, it isn't hitting the same. Kind of mid.
So it is just straight up your first isekai? Like, you didn't even touch Sword Art Online before that?
It was my third isekai. So technically, before I'd watched Overlord, which was my second isekai, I had watched a bit of Sword Art Online and Death Note back in the day, but I didn't really know what anime was because I was quite young when I'd watched them, and I didn't watch them through fully, so I wasn't really aware of what they were. So I don't really consider them my first anime in an emotional sense. Like, from a logical perspective, obviously they were, right? But I didn't really, like, know what was going on at the time. I barely remember anything about those shows.
Let me propose this to you. Was your first isekai not, in fact, the Chronicles of Narnia?
It might, yeah, you know what?
Well, yeah,
My
good
first
point.
isekai was the Chronicles of Narnia. You are correct.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. No Turkish delights for me though.
I've never read the novels, but yeah, I watched the movie way back in the day when I was younger. I loved that fucking
I
film.
did read the novels beforehand. That's right. I will say that I had the opposite experience of you in a way in which instead of being like, okay, well now I can't watch any other isekai because I'm surprised that this one is so good. It was more like I watched this isekai, it was so good. Oh, all of the rest of them must be this good too. And then I start watching, say, Overlord, and I'm sure Overlord's great. I've heard great things about the light novel. I don't know anything about it because I haven't read it, okay? But I will say the first season of the anime was very disappointing to me at that point. Even though Myth and Roy did the opening for it, even though it has some, I guess, cute looking girls. But that's not enough. That's a dime a dozen in anime land, and that's just sort of par for the course.
And
I
that's
was
actually
the same with Tanya.
Yeah, that's actually a rather interesting because I was about to say as well. I attempted to watch Tanya as well, and I had that very similar experience of just it not really fully being there for me. And that's not to in any offense against anyone that enjoys those stories in particular. Hell, like maybe if I gave it another shot, I might enjoy it. But I think it kind of like there's something special about ReZero, right? There's something about it that is almost genre defining in a way for the isekai genre, I think. And I don't know if you guys agree with this, but I've found, like, especially since ReZero has come out, a lot of isekai that have come out since have had to really hone down on some sort of gimmick or thing that makes it different from another isekai, right? Like when it comes to isekai that have been recently released, they tend to focus very much on a gimmick element of the story that makes it different from others, right?
Mm-hmm.
For instance, what's that one called?
Usually, yeah.
There's this one anime I didn't watch much of where the whole premise is actually that instead of it focusing on the hero that gets isekai'd, it's actually that the isekai'd heroes are actually bad people, and it focuses on the person who kills them. It was something like that. It's a
Problem children from another world?
Maybe, but something along those lines. I really think ReZero is a genre-defining story.
It is, and that's probably because the primary focus of it is on someone who is from another world, and that maintains and consistently is a part of his character. It's not, this is just a blank canvas character that anyone can pretend
step into.
to jump into
And
with no real history. This is a person who seems that way at first, and Tappei has even mentioned that he wrote Subaru at the beginning to be relatable, but he doesn't lose that relatability as it goes on.
And this is, I think, that's really special about ReZero, and in particular with Subaru as a protagonist, is that it hits that element of relatability of like, oh, he's from a similar situation to us, so we can kind of like jump.
He's just like me for real.
Yeah, and then people do that, and then Subaru does things you do not like, and you get angry and annoyed. And I think a lot of people I don't know how much of the discussion you saw at the time, Goal, but I've heard a lot of people were really angry when Subaru started to like get more quote unquote annoying, and like he was becoming more.
Yeah, I think people are more annoyed coming into the whale part, which is weird. I mean, after the whale part, where he's like, I like, why aren't you dedicating yourself to? Actually, no. After the confession was the most I saw hatred for Subaru, pretty much blanketly. Like people kind of were just like, oh, is he edgy? Is he gonna persevere and get a power up at this point? Like, sure, people are kind of like, oh, he made a mistake with Amelia when he said all these things about, you need me, blah blah blah.
Kill himself.
Yeah. You got to fix it, bro. Just go back in time.
Pretty much, but like, there's that, and it's like it's as you said, the idea that like other isekai anime would be like, okay, well, he made this one mistake, but like we're still gonna give him a break. Like narratively, we're gonna give him a break. We're gonna make things resolve pretty neatly here. But things, as we see in Arc 4, don't resolve neatly at all. So like things have wide repercussions from there on out. Even when he solves everything in quotes, people were thinking of it differently, like junk food, as you said. Like it's in the background, it's
Yeah.
whatever.
I think I read a report that their biggest viewership drop was after episode 13. Like I can imagine that after 18, more people would be mad at Subaru, but they're going to be the ones who are sticking around for the story regardless.
Regardless,
Yeah.
because they're that invested at that point.
Sticking around is one thing, but the discourse was the issue. I mean, like when you're on a forum or whatever talking about ReZero, you're already a small percentage of people, so their types of issues will be different than the general audience's issue.
Yeah, and their general perception of things, right?
I found that a lot as I've been going through Arc 7 and 8 of just the difference in view of Subaru as a character that I see on like any, say, like a comment section for a summary or the primary Reddit thread or any other discussion about a new chapter being released or changes to the light novel, is that people are, I won't say impatient about Subaru, but they really just, it seems a strong belief in the community is that they want him to be more powerful than he is. And I think to me that just kind of robs part of the character that makes him who he is keeps that relatability going forward.
Yeah, well, I think the major thing that makes Subaru special is that his struggles are very human. Like, even when he's in these fantastical situations and up against, like, impossible scary odds, even with, like, the time loop elements, Subaru at the day is very close to the average person, right? So the way he has to be smart and he has to solve stuff by thinking, rather than just being overpowered and be able to destroy everything with a wave of his hand. And his growth. And one thing in terms of Subaru's character, I really appreciated, and this is like someone that has mental health problems, and he emulates that sort of aspect of a person really well as a character, like him regressing sometimes, like he's making this progress as a person throughout the story as we see, but sometimes he regresses because there's a stressful situation, and he come back more to his self-hatred and stuff, and it's a really, I think Tepeya's done a really good job with Subaru of like emphasizing that just because he falls back into like some of this self-doubt and the self-hatred and like the struggles of his situation doesn't mean he isn't growing as a person. Because I think when a lot of people see that, like with a character, when a character says, oh, I'm going to change in a lot of stories, they just immediately change, like snap like that, right? There's not much...
To be fair, the jump from 18 to 19 does feel like a pretty immediate change.
It does, but I think, in fairness, though, like, Subaru has shown a level of competence before then. It's more that he hadn't had confidence in his actions before then. Does that make sense?
Does. Yeah. I mean, we obviously know the character pretty well at this point.
Yeah, so I think it's that kind of, that element for, well, I find in a lot of stories, like, oh, I'm going to change, and so I do it. But then you never really see them struggle with that change. And Subaru, as the story goes on especially, you see him struggle with it. And that's fucking awesome.
Mm-hmm. I mean, if in a general sense, the very concept of return by death is anxiety turned into a superpower.
Yes, it is.
It's uncomfortable. You never want to be in part of it. It makes you more aware of every possible thing that can go wrong and all the ways that it's going to get ruined. And it keeps you from being in the moment and thinking about what you can do with what you have in front of you.
Yes. That is honestly fantastic analysis. In fact, like, genuinely, that is like fucking spot on awesome. That's fucking cool, dude. I've never even thought about it in that way, but it just completely summarizes that almost, doesn't it? It even like the multiple loops and the extra stress of each situation. It's almost like the spiraling of anxiety, right? The more you think about your anxiety and the more you delve into those thoughts, the more it spirals and becomes bigger and bigger and crushes you under the weight of it.
Mm-hmm.
That's fun.
Until you get the strength to reach out and find either something that you were ignoring because it was going to be too hard to do, or someone else who's there that you were too anxious, or in a lot of Subaru's cases, just too self-conscious, or having other problems like pride or jealousy of the person to reach out a hand to them. even though they had it offered in front of his face for a while.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I totally agree with that because, I mean, that's a huge theme of the show, really, obviously. But like, one of the things that people talk about with Isekai or ReZero is just like, there's moments in which it seems like there's breakthroughs, and then the next arc comes and it feels like there's like peril, and it's not only peril in the situation, but it's peril in the convictions of the people in the story, which is something you don't really see that often in anime. I mean, I know it's a book, but like in the writing of animes or even web novels, you don't really get arcs structured in like tiers where it's like, okay, first we get the narrative about what's going on plot wise, and then we get the narrative of what they're trying to accomplish, but then three, how is their psychological state holding up? Is it changing? Is it morphing? We get different perspectives. We get different focuses on characters that are going through genuine issues that people would go through, which is why people say stuff like, oh, like Teppei writes really real characters in a sense. It's because that sort of attention is sort of foregoed because it's, as we can see, it creates a very lengthy story, as we could tell, to kind of have to give that much attention, but he's more than willing of doing that. So before going into the writing part about what Teppei does, I just want to say that that's the main appeal of ReZero to, I think, all of us. And overall, I think that's one of its biggest staying powers in my brain, I think, over other things, which is just like, yeah, a lot of other series have a lot of mysteries, and some of them are even as long as ReZero, but not a lot of them could have people give 10 different impressions about a character, or a story, and all of them be valid in their own ways, or even, like their feelings. You could see how people could get to that feeling in different ways.
Like everyone has their resolutions that they can make, and whether those are right or wrong, Tappei takes a really interesting route with writing the story going forward, in that he immediately either introduces a foil to that or tests that resolution.
That resolution.
Sometimes for the good, like instantly, as soon as Subaru decides that I'm going to start trying and like start over, work from zero, and like actively make an effort and reach out to people, he has to go and reach out to so many people who have already rejected him and gone against him, and be calm and patient with the whole thing, constantly relying on other people until he gets past that point. Or in season 2, in the opposite, as soon as he makes the conviction, I'm going to abuse Return by Death and just start killing myself to start over as soon as I understand what's going on, he gets his, and I believe this is still held true based on the Q&A, what Subaru considers his worst loop ever, which starts from like I Know Hell and goes, I think 2 episodes past that, maybe just 1, I'm not sure. But it puts a foil in front of them, and then that just leads to either further pushing on why they made the negative conviction, or going back around and giving them to a new positive force to go forward. And that whole idea of conviction is even a main driving plot of the story. The 5 main candidates, each, the only thing that really separates them, aside from just where they come from, is what they are determined to see happen with the nation. And the more one falters from that, the worse they're doing in their sort of race, their royal selection.
Yeah, this is actually a thing I was going to mention as well. I really like the idea of like, just because a change happens within the story doesn't mean it's a positive change, right? Sometimes people change for the worse or have a conviction that is not good for them, but they do not know that. And I think that like Subaru's journey, even like these like other characters throughout the story, that is captured really well by Teppei. Like the idea of, oh, I need to hold on to my conviction, or oh, I need to change in this way, but maybe that's not the right decision for you. And avoiding spoilers in general, but I think Teppei has done a fantastic job of doing that as an overall story thing with Subaru as a character. The direction he goes, like he's constantly being challenged on his ideas, and is this healthy or not? And that's fucking awesome.
Yeah, I can promise you that persists past where you've seen Wolf.
Yeah,
That is definitely a theme that continues on.
yeah, I've heard very good things, I will say.
That actually, we should probably mention to everyone the point where we all are in the story,
Yes.
so there's context. So you should start, Wolf, as our host.
Yes. So I am currently about 20, 30 chapters into Arc 7 of the web novel, which would be like Season 4, Season 5 content, if that ever was to happen.
Yeah, and I'm at like arc 7, chapter 10-ish.
And I'm on chapter 20 of Arc 8. So I finished 7. I've read the first 5 light novels. I'm looking for the 6th one to get a physical copy. Watched all the anime. I've gone back through the Arc 1 and 2 web novels, read everything there was available in English. I'm translating what hasn't been. That's a long process still, but going back through it. So I've not read Arc 4 yet, but I've read everything else possible.
Yeah. Arc 4 is like, I think it might still be like the longest in terms of length out of any arc. It is a doozy. So
I know it still has the highest chapter count. I think 7 eclipsed it in word count.
I wouldn't be surprised if 7 has eclipsed it in word count. But yeah, it is a fat arc in terms of content. So
I've also read most of the If stories
yes,
and a lot of the short stories, but not all of them.
This is a rather. I've not touched the short stories really at all. That's an element I haven't even looked at yet. So that might be an interesting thing for us to possibly look for in the future together.
I also own the EX novels, but I've not gotten the chance to read them yet. So those are some extra content. Some of it's relative and necessary for especially Arc 7, which can throw a lot of stuff at you if you haven't done some homework at you. It's not necessary reading,
but
it's like skipping The Hobbit before starting Lord of the Rings. You're not going to know a lot of the nouns or what people are talking about, but you'll understand it through context eventually.
You'll get the general idea from context clues, but you'll get a deeper appreciation if you have that extra.
Yeah, something very funny that people say about storytelling is that you need to start the story as close to the end as possible, right? Which is something that I feel like is very relative. It's a relative statement because in ReZero, right? Maybe this is as close to the end as possible with getting all the necessary information that you need to get, right? But then it's like, okay, well, there's a lot of stories that kind of start you and just throw you into the world, and like, okay, you'll learn through context what all this is, right? With the way that some side stories are written, it's like getting all that supplemental information about like, okay, well, maybe we started the main story here, but like you would know if you run into it, you can just guess by context, and it'll be kind of mysterious, but like not only that, but we actually do have, as he said, like The Hobbit that you can read, which is all these side stories pretty much, because all of them are relevant to all the side characters and will probably come back in some way, through their arcs. But like, yeah, you don't need to read it. I mean, you really don't usually.
Do you really need to know that Crowley has the divine protection of being good in bed? That's not really necessary to know about his character.
Information for me to continue on with the story. In fact, I would say that makes me less interested in reading this story.
I mean, it's not even about boredom. It's like people would pick this up if it's like, oh, I bought a magazine to read this story, right? And then it's like, oh, here, it's a ReZero side story. Oh, I'm gonna read that, I guess, on my like way through the train, in Japan. But like for us, it's like, all right, a translator has to slave hours away trying to translate this, and then it's like, this story is about them having fun at a festival in a town that'll never be mentioned again. And it's like, okay, that sounds good.
Well, those kind of side stories are usually just addendums to main novels that are released. The ones that are released as their individual ones are the
EX
Greed
stories
if,
are different.
the
Yeah,
Sloth
of course,
and the EX novels.
I would say the problem with Tepeya's is that sometimes the stuff he does introduce does end up being mentioned again, or is it bored?
Yeah,
right.
That's why I said it's like going in and being like, oh, I'm just confused about this, but through context, I can piece it together.
You can figure it out, yeah.
Though I guess there are times, which is the most annoying part, is in which he alludes to something that you're like, what is he alluding to here? But then it's like, oh, it's somebody like writes down like, oh yeah, if you read the side story, you'll know what he's talking about.
And then you're like, oh fuck, I gotta go back and read that.
But they're keeping secret. Yeah. It's like, okay.
Right. Like this is not a spoiler, but when you get to the end of Arc 7, they are not who you think they are. They're from a side story. That's your tip for not getting overly confused about something like I did pretty drastically.
Yeah, I imagine stuff like that can happen, right? Because of that.
It happened a couple of times where he's clearly describing a character that he's established somewhere else, and you've just not been introduced to them in the story yet.
Yeah.
And they do a decent enough job at covering what you need to know, but you kind of miss out on like the ability to guess or understand what's coming beforehand and not be able to go into it.
But I guess
It's
that's almost two levels of enjoyment, right? You can either have that extra investment in the side stories and then kind of like have a bit more understanding of what's going on in the background of the story. But then if you don't, you also have the extra mystery element of what the fuck is going to happen.
right. Like it's they'll summarize it and do a well enough job that you don't feel the need to go back and read through it. It just depends on if it's a good quality. But on the topic of good quality, though, this was part of our estimated overview for this first episode. Should we go into some of the things that are maybe some either hot takes or cold dislikes of the story as a whole? Any issues or problems you have with it?
Oh, yeah. Now we've got to get controversial and talk about stuff that we might not like about one of our favorite series. Oh, God.
I can start if you need some time to
I
actually think of anything negative.
Think of it out, because I don't want to just say something negative for the sake of saying it. I want to have genuine criticism. So yeah, if you don't mind starting, Connor.
So this is not a hard criticism of the plot or the story in general. This is merely an aspect of who Tappei is as a writer and a human being. But he has a condition where he is unable to imagine anything in his head. He doesn't have like that visual picture in his mind,
yes,
which is something that a lot of people do have. The web novel, before it gets edited, shows that heavily because he has to describe every character's action, every detail, every scene, because it's the only way he can get across what he is wanting to tell. And it's a drag pretty often. There's only so many times that you can read, and then this person did X to the chair next to them, and it's like, that wasn't relative. You repeated the same details 3 paragraphs in a row. So whoever Tappei, whoever his editor is, you're the freaking goat.
You're doing
like,
God's work.
Holy crap. It is intense of how drastic of a difference it is.
Yeah. And you know what's very funny about that? There's another author who writes light novels that I like, and he has a philosophy that he kind of noticed the same thing, not in Tappei, but I mean like in himself, where he just decided that he will every story that takes place, he will not describe the setting because he once recognized the fact that he's describing the setting too much, and he's like, I'll just let other people figure out what's going on in the setting.
Yeah,
it's where they are doesn't matter. They're just having conversation. They're in a school. They're like that's as far as it goes.
That's as much as you need. You don't need to say. And this is literally the level that it gets to, especially in 7 and 8 that are more machine translated at first, so you get those details more firmly put into the text. Of its one person writes, they were speaking in a classroom with only 3 other people there. The other one is walked into a room that was dimly lit both by the windows as well as light coming in from the fluorescent bulbs in the ceiling, with a lot of words on the chalkboard explaining the day's lesson. 11 other students were at their desks, some chatting idly on the side about this topic, others doing something that Subaru couldn't even hear, while he walked up to his one friend at the desk, then 2 paragraphs describing that friend, another one what they look like, before then he picks up 1 line of dialogue, 3 more paragraphs of not dialogue, and then it goes into the conversation.
Yeah, I could feel that.
Yeah, and I think you guys are right in the sense of sometimes less is more.
Yeah, exactly.
Sometimes I don't need an absolute description of everything that I'm saying, because sometimes it's almost even better to let the reader themselves get more invested by imagining what they're seeing, right?
Mm-hmm. Also, it's a light novel. You can have an illustration.
Yeah, you've got that extra element that a lot of other novels don't get to use.
Mm-hmm. Aside from that, my only primary true criticism of the series is I think Tappei lets his primary illustrator get away with some designs that he should not get away with, especially when they're described very differently in the text. Like, do you know Beatrice is supposed to be over 4 feet tall?
Wait.
Like, at the point of Amelia and Subaru's shoulders?
Wait, what? Wait, seriously?
Yes. She should look like an 11 to 12-year-old, and the design paints her as, like, 7.
Wow, I never even noticed that.
It's similar with Liliana, where it's not as bad until you get the illustration of what she looks like.
Illustration, yeah. There's not as much consistency between the illustration and what is actually described.
As well as Carmilla, one of the witches, is meant to be a fully grown woman. That's hidden. It happens quite often. And I think that once that illustration comes out and people have any positive feedback to it, he sticks with that. And over the course of the story, the character design shifts from what it was to how it was drawn.
I guess that's in some level to keep consistency within the story, right? And how people view certain stuff.
To a point, yeah.
It's unfortunate that that is a thing that happens, though. I understand why from like logistics of making a light novel and also doing the illustrations and like the timeline of all of that. It makes sense to me as why that would happen, but it doesn't stop it from being frustrating, I imagine, sometimes. I guess for me, I think this isn't even really like a major criticism. This is just like a thing I've noticed as experiencing the story and over again. Arc 1 is such a drag to re-experience, I won't lie. I really enjoyed Arc 1 experiencing it for the first time, but it's the only arc out of all of ReZero which I find really hard to get through. So whenever I'm restarting a read or restarting a watch, getting through that, even though it's the shortest, getting through that first arc is really difficult sometimes.
Mm-hmm. I think it's at its best in the web novel because you get Subaru's dialogue internally for a lot of it, and it's completely uncensored.
That's actually one thing I was about to say. Yeah, I genuinely think the most I appreciated Arc 1 in was the web novel, because as we went through that when we were doing our readings for it.
Hey, where can we find those live readings, Wolf? Of
on
Arc 1?
Studio Reverie, this very channel you are watching this podcast on, if you would be interested.
Is that just you reading them out?
No, it's a fully voice-acted with our amazing cast members and narrated by our narrators too. Please, if you're interested, do check it out. I promise it's a good time. You get to hear British Subaru swear a lot.
That does sound like a good time.
But genuinely, when I know you with what you were saying about like the cussing with Subaru in Arc 1, but genuinely I think that adds an extra element of entertainment for me. Because I've always imagined Subaru as someone that cusses a lot. I don't know, that's just how he comes
Oh, he does. He absolutely does. Like, the translators take a lot of liberties with what Subaru says and makes choices for the words that are actually written in English. And they kind of hide a little bit of his character, but we'll get into that after this. Keep going, Wolf.
But yeah, I for Arc 1 in particular, I think, aside from the web novel, it's just difficult to re-experience that part of the story because, and obviously it works great as an introduction, but when it comes to like the scale of the rest of the arcs as they get bigger and bigger and like more and more convoluted and interesting and extra like stuff you learned about the world, it doesn't, I just can't get the same enjoyment. I honestly think that's it in terms of things that I have direct issue is. Apart with, honestly, you already mentioned the prose and the description element of Tepe's writing. I think that's it in terms of anything I would have major issues with. Is there anything you can think of, Gold?
That I have issues with?
Or even just...
Or just a spicy hot take.
Just a spicy hot take, yeah. Just if you've got any spicy hot takes, throw down the gauntlet. We want to hear. You
two had some pretty good ones. I think I would have said both of them in some times. Let me think of some other things. You know what I don't like? I don't like the what don't I like? There are times in which I think that I wouldn't say there's a lot of frivolousness to like the detail. I mean, this is something that Palazard went over, but like I feel like there's sometimes where he doesn't editorialize his own stuff enough in terms of like paring it down. As I said before, brevity is really important sometimes in story writing. And I feel like he doesn't understand that. I think that's fine. But I think he should try to segment because as big as ReZero is, like if he was a bit more creative, he could be like, well, here's here's a thing about the world. Here's something that I'm writing that's all just about the world. And here's stuff that I'm writing just about Subaru's journey, right? And I feel like how epic the story is at this length is a blessing and a curse. And I can complain all about the curses, but in the moment, I do enjoy a lot of the blessings. So it's hard for me to really complain about it all that much.
Yeah, and I think That's almost what we're coming down to here when we're talking about hot takes and stuff. Is genuinely it's really difficult to think of stuff that we have big gripes with almost, because the story has so many positive aspects to it. It's hard for me to do that. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. All right. So I'm going to throw in an actual spicy take here then.
ooh, okay,
Tappei coddles Amelia too much.
okay.
I believe that.
Oh, do you know
She
what?
is too fawned over by everyone else in the story. Like a critique I'll hear sometimes of ReZero is that all the girls in the story just like Subaru for no reason, which obviously that's wrong,
Yeah,
or at least it's a bad take that misses
that misses
information.
the point. Yeah.
But I think that is genuinely true for Amelia. That anyone who's not explicitly racist towards her or already occupied in a relationship themselves looks at her with more doll eyes and doughy eyes than I think she deserves. And it has caused him to infantilize her character more as the story has gone on.
Right, I
Yes.
agree.
It's not, I would even say it's not even the issue of like her deserving this treatment. It's more like she is, because of the way she is being treated. With a lot, because she's played for a lot of jokes. I like, and especially as the series has gone on, like a lot of her scenes are more focused on joking elements rather than like serious emotional stuff with her. I think it kind of, as you said, infantilizes her character way more than necessary. Like it kind of, because when I first, like, especially in the first arc for ReZero, and even with some stuff in arc 2, I really thought like Amelia had like a lot more going on, because obviously she has stuff with her backstory, but like in terms of like how she acts and like analyzing how she acts in the first arc and the second arc, she's got like way more going on there. But it seems like from that point onwards, she kind of has less agency as a person.
Mm-hmm.
And not even in terms of her own arc within arc 4 and season 2, where she gains her own agency. I mean in terms of like as a character, there's something off there. I think
She is a very reactive character for the entirety of the anime, at least.
Yeah.
Like she is not a proactive person that goes out and makes things happen. Things happen because of her, which does get adjusted and changed much later in the story, a little bit later than I would have liked.
Yeah.
But it's definitely noticeable that she's, I wouldn't say to the point of being flanderized, but she is. I mean, just noticed this in our Arc 1 and Arc 2 live readings that she has more sass, there's more maturity to the character in those web novels than there is in the light novel,
Yeah.
and especially in the anime.
And this is, and I honestly, from the outset, I can just say I prefer that interpretation of Amelia's character way more to what we have in the anime and light novels. Personally, I just feel it's a lot more interesting when she is a character, has a bit more sass and has a bit more of that element to her character, rather than just being like the perfect doe-eyed angel almost, right? Which Tappei sees her as, obviously. But
I mean, I would be fine with that being who she is if that was an aspect of the character that would get explored, but it's the one thing I don't have faith that ever will, because it's just the cute, naive girl that he wrote the story to write a story about. You can't expect different, but it is the weakest point.
It is the weakest
to me.
point. I do agree.
If we're talking entirely individual gripes about characters, I will say one of the weird individual gripes I have is probably how he writes his villains, which is I said that I've explained this before, but I'm not huge, like I can't overarchingly gripe about it. But I think it's a bit weird how their motivations have been unclear this entire time, but their personality is so, it's tied to the sin. I do like how it's not on the nose with how their sins work, but I think they're like hyper manic, like hyper, histrionic sort of personality kind of is entertaining for a bit, but then it's like, what else is going on? Like I know what some of the witches want and all this stuff, but like it feels like, the more of them that get taken down in the story, let's assume that some do. And we kind of get like a different feeling about like, where is this going? Like, where's the story going? Like, where's the overarching antagonism coming from? it like becomes like you're kind of looking through like muddy water, really. And some of them are treated more well than others, which is so weird because like the ones that he picks to treat more well and more interestingly seems arbitrary.
I think so. Now this is an interesting. I genuinely think it's just because Tappei is a very emotional writer, and he, at least this is my interpretation of how he writes, and he puts a lot of his love and his emotion into his work. So, and I think he is very outwardly stated that he just like hates the archbishops because they're awful people, right? So it's almost like
irredeemable monsters with no comprehension of how a normal person should think and deserve no empathy or pity. Is, I believe, a paraphrasing of one of his answers at the Q&A of just what he thinks of the archbishops.
Yeah, he kind of doesn't leave room for interpretation there, because if I'm like, it's like from his own heart, like the deepest evils that you can imagine, right? I think that's how. So it's harder for him to have that sort of balance and element as a writer, which I agree is like a flaw, but I think it's like a really almost interesting introspective into who Tappei is as a person himself.
Yeah, I'm kind of more with you on that, Gold. I think that worked well once for Betelgeuse, but the more that reoccurred, the more it felt like it was just kind of fighting the same villain.
Yeah, it does feel like different flavors of insanity, or the same like pure insanity, which he could have made them more interesting by sort of just like giving them each their own craziness. Like, for example, I'm not going to say like names, but like the next one could be like a very cold and calculating one who's like obviously still insane, but like rational and like might have a few friends or might have, like whatever, but all of them just like are just like forces of nature pretty much. And I understand that he doesn't like, he gets attached to characters and you probably have a hard time, dealing with them as villains, if that's the case. Like Roswell, for example, like he's like, oh, he has a lot of sympathy, I can tell, for like Roswell still and stuff, which makes sense. But like, and it does make those things interesting, but because it's so interesting, I wish he did it more,
Yeah, it's almost as if because you also have that, like, even like, again, like Roswell in the story, when you have these almost force of nature type characters, it's like, well, I kind of got more here. Could I not get more here too?
Right. I think that's a big point of why Roswell and Echidna stand out so much as someone like the highlight antagonists that we get in the series.
Yes.
It's just because they do differ from that. Like Echidna presents herself as an ally, or at least sort of like a neutral force for the majority of it, up until you get to the point where she's just been lying and pretending to be everything that Subaru would want in a friend or ally or girl.
Yeah.
And it's really just a cold, emotionless monster. But it's turned Roswell into that too. But
that in itself is interesting, right? Because it's not even insanity.
Exactly.
It's almost sociopathy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And
she's Echidna's a psychopath. She was born that way.
Yeah, that's
You
true.
could make the argument that like Roswell's become a sociopath, and I mean it's all antisocial personality disorder. I think at this point in the actual diagnosis of this, but people still understand like what a psychopath is and what a sociopath is. But Echidna is a psychopath where she has no capacity to feel them, so she just pretends.
Never had it in the first place.
Exactly, which works with her character of wanting to understand how everyone feels and learn that as her driving motivation.
And that's why her greed works so well. And I think
rather than you get someone like Betelgeuse and it's just he's crazy because he is traumatized and is misinterpreting a book that was mistranslated.
Yeah. I think, as you guys said, it worked more for Betelgeuse because like that would make kind of like sense for his character. But I will agree. I do think you guys make a good point in that there could be a bit more differentiation between the other villains and him, right?
Mm-hmm. And not to get into spoilers, but my favorite antagonist of the series is a highlight of Arc 7, and I know that is a shared view in the community. So once we get into some episodes talking about that, I'll be excited to see how your perspective on that changes, Gold, and if you like some of the antagonists that are introduced there.
Because I honestly think Arc 7's concept's very interesting, and it's something I didn't even expect the story to go to.
Yes.
I like the characters as well. I like the kingdom itself, or the empire. And
we won't get into too many spoilers on what 7 is, though.
Yeah. We won't talk about it here, but I will say that it looks interesting. I just need to keep my nose down and get through all the bulk of chapters.
What I will say about Arc 7 for those that don't know is that it was not an originally planned aspect of ReZero from Tapei's point of view. Like the arc
It wasn't
itself,
in the outline
it
of
wasn't
the
in the
story
outline.
that he had before he started writing. But neither was Rem. So
No.
you take that and leave it.
Exactly. But what I mean to say is that I think it's really cool that Tapei as a writer is willing to let his story like grow. Like I don't know if you know, like with like George R. Martin's writing, for instance, but he's the Gardner type writer, right? Where he loves to let his characters and his plot like kind of grow in its own direction. And I think Tapei is starting to feel that a bit because he's writing so much with these characters and this world. He's getting more and more invested and maybe showing us a bit more, which I'm very happy about because it means more ReZero for me.
Yeah, and genuinely, some of the best stuff that he's put out is in the back half of 7 and the beginning of 8.
Yeah.
So we've got just better and better ahead of us.
We've been eating good.
Like, it's no one's opinion that ReZero has already animated the best that it has to offer. Everyone's waiting for season 4 or 5 or maybe 3 if we're unlucky. We'll have to see.
I will say that's a really awesome element of being a novel reader and like reacting to anime only's like stuff when they see like a new anime come out for ReZero. It's so fucking cool seeing people experience this stuff that we haven't, or we have already and they haven't.
Mm-hmm. Well, for our anime only listeners, you might be wanting to tune into our next episode for sure. Episode 2 is planned to be about expectations and hopes for season 3, and there's definitely going to be a good chunk of that's non-spoilers for anime onlys to really get you hyped up and excited for this.
We'll definitely separate. We'll very much have like the beginning section being completely just in general like excitement about the arc itself, and then we may have a spoiler section if anyone.
And talking about the anime as well, just the anime in general.
Absolutely,
yeah.
But
there's some
state
cut
of the
content
anime,
and mistranslations that
all these different
anime
things.
only.
Because the anime right now, I mean, it has always been in a weird spot. So talking about the history of that and then also what it looks like now and how it's unclear is going to be kind of interesting, I think.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think especially like even if you're not an anime only, I think that's going to be very interesting to just discuss and talk about. In general, actually, we'd love to hear what you, the viewers, think in general in terms of like what you'd like to see us analyze about ReZero, any cool stuff you guys would like to mention. Please write it down in the comments below. I will be reading every single one of them.
I want to hear your hot takes.
Yes.
Not bad takes. Not anything made in bad faith. Like genuine hot, spicy takes.
Because I honestly, if I see any interesting ones, I may have to bring up a couple for the next time just to talk about that, because I think that'd be really fun.
Yeah, you never know when someone's just going to bring up the point that kind of just changes your perspective on something a lot. And there's always going to be that one negative view that, is just that person doesn't know what they're talking about. But for the most part, I want to hear some genuine good criticism, because we came up with 5 total.
And in fairness as well, like, as you said, like, sometimes someone will say a criticism that you may not have initially fully even thought of, but subconsciously was kind of there. And then when you read it, you're like, oh my God, yeah, that's right. Like, this wasn't really a criticism, but when you were talking about earlier, like, Return by Death being almost an allegory for anxiety, I'd never really truly thought that out in my head, but subconsciously that just immediately clicked when you said that to me. So I'm really fascinated to know, what are your guys' thoughts about that?
All right.
In the comments.
Yeah.
I guess in general.
I think that's...
Is there anything else anyone else wants to say before we wrap up for today's podcast?
Sponsor us?
Yo! I'm just saying.
Sponsor us by, joining the channel, watching us when the live streams come back.
YouTube does have things called sponsors, right?
Yes, we have memberships for the channel itself.
What's available in the memberships right now, Wolf? That's not available to the public yet.
So, we are currently slogging through the Liliana chapters for Arc 5. And if you are a member, you are able to see the individual chapters that we have released until we've completed them and uploaded the full saga onto YouTube. So if you're interested in seeing Wolfiana come back in full force, that is available to you.
Those chapters will also have my premiere as a voice-acted character in the pre-recorded web novel readings for our channel.
Woo! Oh,
That's true.
I'm so excited, genuinely, for the future of not just Reverie, the podcast in general. This has been so much fun. Thank you guys for coming.
Thank
my
you for
amazing
hosting.
co-hosts.
Oh, no problem. No problem. Anytime. Actually, next week even.
And perhaps, maybe, even another one next week. Wow.
Well, until then, this has been Studio Reverie. I'm Palazard.
I'm one of the guys.
I'm one of the guys.
I'm the other one of the guys.
We are the guys, and we had a wonderful time.
That we
will
did.
see you next week.
We will
Goodbye.
return by death.
Not by death.
Okay.